bombshell tonight in the Nolan Wells investigation. Tonight, the timeline seemingly blows up. This as Nolan's mother is investigated. Why? And tonight, possibly even more important, where is Nolan's phone?
Yeah, our CBS News partner is revealing some new GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, tracking the movements of the boat Nolan Wells was on before he disappeared July 4th.
We want the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells.
There is something about Nolan Wells' final hours that investigators still cannot fully explain. His phone has not yet undergone the forensic examination his family believes could reveal critical information. His official autopsy has been completed, but the findings have not been made public. And now, the case has reached a point where members of Congress are asking the Department of Justice to take a closer look. But this is where the story becomes even more complicated. Nolan was only 18 when he disappeared during a 4th of July trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. His friends returned without him. 2 days later, Nolan was found dead. What happened during those missing hours remains the central question. An independent autopsy commissioned by Nolan's family did not establish a cause or manner of death. The findings were classified as undetermined pending further investigation. That does not prove homicide. It does not prove an accident. It means the evidence available at that stage could not provide a definitive answer. And now, several important pieces of this investigation are moving at the same time: Nolan's phone, the digital evidence, the official autopsy, the grand jury process, and a growing push for federal scrutiny. So what exactly is new? What can the evidence actually tell us about Nolan's final hours? And could these developments change what investigators ultimately conclude about what happened to him? Tonight, we are going back through the timeline, not through rumors or internet theories, but through the evidence that can be verified, the accounts that remain disputed, and the questions investigators still have to answer. This is Cases Decoded. And this is the story of Nolan Wells, the new evidence that could change everything. To understand why these developments matter, we have to return to the day Nolan Wells disappeared. Quick note before we start: this case involves the unresolved death of a teenager. We won't be using graphic detail, but if that's not something you want to sit with tonight, take care of yourself first. If you're new here, welcome. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I always like seeing how far this reaches. And to everyone who's been here already, sharing these videos, leaving comments, helping push cases like this into more feeds, thank you. That's genuinely how a channel like this survives. If you're new, here's what we do: verified evidence, real timelines, and reporting centered on the victim, not internet speculation. If that sounds like your kind of channel, stick around and consider subscribing. Now, back to Nolan. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He'd grown up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and graduated from Ocean Springs High School in 2025. By the summer of 2026, he was heading into his sophomore year at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he played wide receiver for the football team. He was supposed to report back for training camp shortly after that 4th of July weekend. His parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, describe a son who made an impression on people quickly. At his funeral, his mother recalled that he had a way of making people feel seen, welcomed and valued, that he could lift someone's confidence with just a few words. That's the version of Nolan that existed before any of this, before the headlines, before the timeline, before the questions. A recent high school grad. A college athlete with a season ahead of him. A son who, by every account his family has given publicly, called his mother Mom and meant it. The following day was supposed to be a holiday outing. Instead, it became the beginning of a case that remains unresolved. On the evening of July 3rd, Nolan was home with his parents. He cooked dinner for them that night. Afterward, he headed out to spend the night at a friend's house, ahead of the 4th of July plans the next day. His mother has said the last thing he told her, before he left, was simple: "Hey Mom, I'm about to go, "I love you." Then a hug, a kiss, and he was gone. There's nothing unusual in any of this. It's an ordinary night before a holiday. But it matters here because it's the last documented period Nolan spent with his family before the trip that would change everything that followed. The next morning, a boat left a private dock in the Ocean Springs area at 9:56 a.m., according to data later released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. On board was Nolan, along with a group of friends, mostly people he'd known from high school. The boat reached Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. Horn Island is a federally protected barrier island, about 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, accessible only by water. No permanent residents, no infrastructure, just sand, pine trees, and open coastline. On a normal weekend, it's a quiet spot. On the 4th of July, it's the opposite. Roughly 300 people, many of them former classmates and friends from the surrounding coast, converge there for exactly this kind of holiday gathering. That geography, remote, boat access only, crowded only in bursts, becomes important later, when investigators try to reconstruct who saw what, and when. Before we go further, one thing needs to be said clearly: being named in this case does not make someone a suspect. As of today, nobody has been charged in connection with Nolan's death. Keep that in mind for everything that follows. Nolan didn't go to Horn Island alone. He went with a group he'd grown up with, guys he'd played ball with, people he'd known since high school. Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, Morgan Seymour, Trace's Tin Shepherd, Javon Williams, Wyatt Pyron, Eric Alcantara, LeBaron Broomfield, Jalen Williams. Some of them are the ones who'd end up on that boat back to the mainland, without Nolan. Two other names matter to the afternoon: Katie McCormick and her sister, Gracie McCormick. We'll get to why in a moment, and why online confusion between the two of them became its own small mess inside the bigger story. Now hold on to those names, because here's the question this video is actually built around: which of these people saw Nolan last, and why do their accounts of that afternoon not fully agree? On the investigative side, 4 people you'll hear from repeatedly: Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter, who led the initial search; District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, who will present the case to a grand jury; Dr. Roger Mitchell, the forensic pathologist behind the independent autopsy; and attorneys Ben Crump and Eric Hers, representing the Wells family. Keep that distinction in mind as we go. Appearing in this story is not the same as being accused of anything. Once on the island, Nolan was seen moving through the crowd. Photos and videos from that day show him with his arm around friends, smiling, present. For a few hours, this was just a holiday. As the afternoon wore on, accounts start to diverge. Katie McCormick's version of events becomes one of the more discussed pieces of the afternoon timeline, and it's worth noting that her sister, Gracie McCormick, has separately had to publicly clarify her own, more limited role, after online confusion conflated the two. We're not going to resolve who's right here. What we can do is lay out the factual foundation before we get into where the accounts start to contradict each other, because that contradiction is the heart of this case. Around 3 p.m., Nolan told the group he'd get a ride back with someone else later. That's version A, the account from his friends. Nolan chose, on his own, to remain behind on Horn Island, intending to return to the mainland with a different group. Version B is his family's response to that account. Nolan's parents have publicly questioned it, pointing to a few specific things. He didn't have his phone with him at that point, and there are unresolved questions about his keys. To his parents, staying behind under those circumstances doesn't add up. Version C is what can actually be independently verified right now, and that's narrower than either full account. We have a documented boat departure time. We have a reported statement that Nolan planned to get a ride later. We don't yet have independently authenticated evidence establishing exactly why, or confirming everything that happened in between. That distinction matters, because the next few hours contain the largest gap in the timeline. Part of what's fueled online speculation is a video from the island that circulated widely on social media. Many viewers, watching it out of context, believed it showed Nolan in some kind of confrontation. Trace's Tim Shepard, a friend of Nolan's who appears in the clip, addressed this directly in an interview, saying that the yelling heard in the video was her, not evidence of a fight involving Nolan. Javen Williams' account has also been cited in connection with what that footage does and doesn't show. Here's the important distinction: a video can confirm that something happened. It doesn't automatically establish exactly when every event in it occurred, who was involved in every frame, or what happened immediately afterward. A 10-second clip is not a timeline, no matter how many times it gets replayed with new captions attached. From here forward, we're going to use 4 labels to keep this evidence organized: confirmed, established by documentation or verified record; reported, stated by a credible source but not independently verified; disputed, accounts that conflict with each other; unknown, not yet established either way. This is the part of the timeline investigators care about most, the window between roughly 3 p.m., when Nolan was last reliably seen with the group, and 4:31 p.m., when the boat left the island without him. Confirmed, Nolan did not leave the island on the boat that returned to the mainland that afternoon. Reported, Nolan told the group around 3 p.m. that he'd get a ride back later, in connection with staying to talk with someone. Disputed, exactly how, when, and under what circumstances Nolan and the group actually separated. Unknown, Nolan's specific movements and condition during large parts of this window. Investigators have leaned on witness interviews, reportedly around 60 people so far, along with photographs, videos, and location data pulled from devices on the island, to try to reconstruct this gap. The FBI has assisted with examining some of that digital evidence, according to Sheriff Ledbetter. But a roughly 90-minute window, on a crowded, chaotic holiday beach, with a still limited pool of authenticated digital evidence, is exactly the kind of gap that's hard to close completely, and it's the single biggest reason this case remains open. At 4:31 p.m., vessel tracking data shows the boat departing Horn Island. Nolan was not aboard. At 5:44 p.m., the boat arrived back on the mainland, according to Mississippi Department of Marine Resources documentation. Here's the key analytical point, and it's one worth sitting with: GPS data on a boat tells you where the boat was. It does not, by itself, tell you where every person who was supposed to be on it actually was, or why one of them wasn't. It's solid evidence of the vessel's movement, not a complete account of the humans connected to it. Somewhere between that dock and that departure time, Nolan simply isn't accounted for. Nolan didn't come home that night. As hours passed without word, concern turned into alarm. According to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Nolan's mother called to report him missing around midnight, moving into the early morning of July 5th. A search effort followed quickly, and it wasn't small. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the National Park Service all took part, alongside volunteer groups including the United Cajun Navy, and Nolan's own family, who joined the search themselves. Christine Wansley used social media directly, appealing publicly for anyone with information, photos, or video from the island that day to come forward. The search continued through the weekend. On the morning of July 6th, Nolan's body was found in the water off Horn Island, reported by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department as discovered around 8:45 a.m. on the island's western end, found during the search effort involving the National Park Service. Dental records confirmed the identification. At that point, this stopped being a missing person case and became a death investigation. We're not going to describe the physical state in which he was found. That detail adds nothing to understanding what happened, and it's not something his family needs repeated. What matters is what came next, how investigators approached the case from that point forward. In the immediate aftermath, Sheriff John Ledbetter told reporters that his detectives were interviewing people with first-hand knowledge of Nolan's movements that day, and that, at that early stage, no foul play had been identified. Officials noted there were no obvious signs of physical injury, though the full autopsy and toxicology work hadn't been completed yet. That's worth being precise about. Authorities initially considered an accidental drowning possible, while the investigation into the actual cause and manner of death continued. That is not the same as authorities proving drowning. An early working theory, based on incomplete information, is not a final determination, and it wasn't treated as one, even by the sheriff's own department, which kept investigating. If Nolan's death was as simple as an accidental drowning, this next exam should have said so. It didn't. Because the family wanted their own answers, they commissioned an independent autopsy, funded by former NFL player Colin Kaepernick, conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell on July 10, 6 days after Nolan's death. The findings, according to attorney Ben Crump, cause and manner of death, undetermined. No fractures or major traumatic injuries were reported. There was red discoloration noted in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head, but Crump was clear that the reason for that discoloration was not established by the exam. The exam had real limitations. Nolan's body was already in a state of decomposition by the time the independent team examined it, which restricted how much the pathologist could determine. Additionally, some tissue, including from the throat, had already been retained by the state medical examiner's office before the independent autopsy took place, which the report itself described as standard forensic practice, but which nonetheless limited what the second team could evaluate. It's worth saying this plainly, because it gets flattened online constantly. Undetermined is not a synonym for homicide. It means the evidence available at that point could not support a definitive conclusion, one way or the other. By July 31, officials confirmed the state's own autopsy, conducted by the Mississippi Medical Examiner's Office, was complete. Toxicology testing was also finished. Neither result has been made public. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath explained why. Her office withholds autopsy findings in cases like this until they've gone before a grand jury. As she put it in a statement released on July 23, virtually every death in the county, outside of natural causes and non-criminal accidents, is handled the same way, presented to a grand jury before details go public. That's a standard part of her office's process, not something invented specifically for this case. So here's where this stands: the answers exist. They're sitting in a file. They just haven't been shared yet, and the significance right now isn't in what the public has been told. It's in what remains sealed, waiting on a legal process that hasn't run its course. Somewhere in Mississippi right now, there's a phone that has never been forensically examined, and more than a month later, nobody can agree on how to open it. If there's one piece of evidence that could genuinely reshape this case, it's Nolan's phone. Reported, the phone was left behind, or recovered, on the mainland rather than staying with Nolan on the island. To his family, its absence during those critical hours is significant on its own. But beyond that, there are open questions about what's actually stored on the device, potentially messages, location metadata, photos, app activity from July 4th, and possibly deleted material that a forensic recovery could surface. None of that should be treated as evidence that's already been recovered. Right now, it's potential evidence, locked inside a device that hasn't yet been forensically examined. Ben Crump announced in mid-July that his team would coordinate an independent investigation of the phone, with law enforcement examining any findings as well. Over a month later, that examination still hasn't happened. The holdup, based on the most recent reporting, comes down to a disagreement over how a joint forensic examination should actually be conducted, questions of protocol, chain of custody, and who gets access to the device and when. Correspondence has gone back and forth between the family's legal team and the DA's office on exactly this point. The core question hasn't gone away: could the phone help close part of the gap in Nolan's timeline? Could it rule out theories that have spread online, the same way it might support others? Right now, nobody knows, because nobody with the right protocol in place has looked yet. While the phone sits untouched, investigators are still working with everything else: photographs, videos, GPS pings, timestamps, social posts, hundreds of fragments pulled from dozens of phones that were on that island on July 4th. But a fragment isn't proof by itself. It's only as good as its authenticity, its timestamp, whether its chain of custody has held up, and whether it's been placed correctly next to everything around it. A screenshot stripped of its metadata, passed around a group chat and then a comment section, isn't evidence anymore by the time it reaches you, it's a rumor with a photo attached. That's the material investigators are actually sifting through right now. Slowly. Piece by piece. Nothing about this timeline gets closed by a single viral clip. Meanwhile, the people who were actually there have started lawyering up. Several of the friends who were on that boat trip have reportedly retained high-profile attorneys, some preparing for a possible wrongful death suit from the Wells family, others preparing to fight back with defamation claims of their own over how they've been treated online. Read that twice, because it tells you something. These aren't people quietly waiting this out. They're bracing for a legal fight in both directions. And yet, as of tonight, no one connected to that boat trip has been charged with anything related to Nolan's death. Not one. That single fact gets buried under every theory this case has produced. Right now, there isn't one investigation into what happened to Nolan Wells. There are two. One belongs to the state, Sheriff Ledbetter's department, the FBI's digital forensic support, the DA's office building a case for the grand jury. The other belongs to the family. Ben Crump and Eric Hers have spent the past 6 weeks running a parallel track, commissioning the independent autopsy, pushing for the phone examination, reviewing whatever digital and environmental evidence they can access. The family's team has no subpoena power. No prosecutorial authority. What they have is pressure, public, sustained, and increasingly national. And that pressure is exactly what's driven almost every development we've covered so far. Somewhere in the last 6 weeks, this stopped being a local Mississippi story and became a national feed. A fake toxicology document started circulating online, presented as though it were Nolan's real results. It wasn't. Officials confirmed it was fabricated. AI-generated images and videos tied to the case spread the same way, convincing at a glance, worthless as evidence, and impossible to fully unsend once they're out there. This is the exact moment a case like this gets away from the people living through it. Every fake document, every AI clip, makes the real evidence harder to hear over the noise, which is the entire reason a video like this one has to stick to what's actually verified. And then the noise turned into something worse. 3 people have now been federally charged for threatening a judge, a witness, and officials connected to this case. Edward James Porter allegedly called a witness and threatened to kill them and their family, then, in a separate call, threatened to cut them up and put them in a suitcase. Joseph Alfredo Vasquez de Mars allegedly messaged a Jackson County judge on Facebook, describing a package with a bomb inside. A third defendant was charged in a separate incident. Here's the detail that should stop you. Officials say none of the 3 had any actual connection to Nolan, his family, or anyone on that boat. These aren't people with information. They're strangers who found a national controversy and decided to become part of it. To be exact about what this is, these are threat cases. They are not charges for Nolan's death, because right now, no such charges exist for anyone. There's a reason this case reached the scale it did, and it isn't just a missing 90 minutes on a beach. Nolan was black. Every friend he traveled to Horn Island with was white. Layer that fact over Mississippi's long, documented history of racial violence, and you start to understand why his family's questions didn't stay local, why Reverend Al Sharpton stood beside them, why this made it onto national news within days. But here's the line that has to be drawn, carefully. Distrust of how a case is being handled, built on real history, is not the same thing as evidence that Nolan's death was racially motivated. No such evidence has been publicly established, by investigators, by the family's team, by anyone. Claims that go further than that are speculation wearing the language of certainty. And speculation is exactly what this documentary refuses to traffic in. In mid-August, this case reached Washington. At a press conference in Atlanta on August 13, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, representing the Congressional Black Caucus, appeared alongside Ben Crump, Eric Hers, Reverend Al Sharpton, and Nolan's parents. The caucus issued a formal request to the Department of Justice, addressed to Attorney General Todd Blanche and FBI Director Kash Patel, asking for an independent federal review of the case. The Department of Justice has received that request and is reviewing it. Here's what that does not mean: a request for federal review is not a federal takeover of the case, and it's not an indication that DOJ has found anything. It's a request. What it does mean is that a locally run death investigation, involving a private family, has now drawn attention at the highest levels of national government, which tells you something about the scale this case has reached, regardless of what DOJ ultimately decides to do. There's one room this entire case is heading toward, and the public isn't allowed inside it. So what happens now, procedurally? District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath's office will present the completed investigation, including the withheld autopsy and toxicology results, to a grand jury. Attorney Eric Hers told NPR in mid-August that, based on the evidence timeline he's seen, he expects that could happen within roughly 30 days. It's worth explaining plainly what a grand jury actually does, because it gets misunderstood constantly. It decides whether there's sufficient evidence to bring criminal charges. It is not a trial. It does not determine guilt or innocence. It's a threshold decision, charges or no charges, made in private, which is also why so much of this case's evidence remains out of public view until that process concludes. So let's answer the question in the title. The official autopsy is complete, but the results remain confidential. Toxicology testing is also complete, and also unreleased. Nolan's phone still hasn't undergone forensic examination, because the protocol dispute over how to conduct it remains unresolved. Existing digital evidence, photos, video, GPS, and witness accounts, continues to be analyzed. The Congressional Black Caucus has formally requested a DOJ review, and DOJ has received that request. And the case is now moving toward a grand jury that could convene within weeks. None of these developments, individually or together, prove a specific theory of what happened to Nolan. What they do establish is simpler, and just as important: this investigation is not finished. Strip away every theory, every comment section argument, every viral clip, and here's what's actually left standing. Nolan went to Horn Island on July 4th with a group of friends. He did not return with them that afternoon. He was reported missing that night. A multi-agency search followed. His body was recovered on July 6th. An independent autopsy, conducted July 10th, was inconclusive on cause and manner of death. The official state autopsy is complete. Toxicology is complete. Neither has been publicly released. Forensic examination of his phone remains unresolved. A grand jury review is expected. The DOJ has received a request for federal review. And as of now, no one has been publicly charged in connection with Nolan's death. That's the entire confirmed record. 12 facts. Read them again, and notice what's missing. What's missing is everything that actually explains what happened. Why did he stay behind? What happened in the 90 minutes after 3 p.m.? What do the sealed autopsy and toxicology results say? What's on the phone nobody has opened yet? Will the digital evidence ever close the gap? Will the grand jury charge anyone at all? Will the DOJ even take the case? 7 questions. Not one of them has an answer yet. That gap, between 12 known facts and 7 open questions, is this entire case. Picture it laid out like an investigator's evidence board, every card pinned in order, red string connecting what's confirmed to what's still open. July 3rd, home with family. July 4th, 9:56 a.m., the boat departs. 11:14 a.m., Horn Island. Afternoon, the gathering. 3 p.m., the last reliable sighting, and the beginning of the disputed window. 4:31 p.m., the boat leaves without him. That night, reported missing. July 5th to 6th, the search, and the recovery. July 10th, the independent autopsy. The week since, the sealed official results, the stalled phone examination, the threats, the misinformation, the family's advocacy, and now, Washington. Pin the last card, and the board still isn't finished. The case remains open. If this case moves forward in a meaningful way, it will likely come from one of these: the release of the official autopsy findings, the toxicology results, a completed forensic examination of the phone, authenticated digital evidence that closes part of the timeline gap, new witness information, environmental or water analysis, the outcome of the grand jury, or the DOJ's decision on federal review. The evidence that changes this case won't be the loudest theory online. It will be the evidence investigators can authenticate and prove. Before we close, pull back from the investigation entirely, because that's not actually what any of this was for. Nolan Wells was a son who kissed his mother goodbye on his way out the door. A student. An athlete with a season ahead of him that he never got to play. A friend, by every account, who made people feel noticed the moment he walked into a room. He would have turned 19 on August 19th, a date that, this year, arrives with his case still unresolved and his family still waiting for a phone call no one's made yet. That's the part of this story that can't get lost under timelines and evidence labels, and it's the reason any of this is worth doing carefully. If you take one thing from this video, take this: don't harass anyone connected to this case. Don't accuse people without evidence. Several of the names in this documentary belong to people who did nothing wrong, and they're living through this too. Don't share fake documents or AI-generated content as if it's fact. If you actually have credible information, it belongs with investigators, not in a comment section. And above everything else, respect what this family is still carrying. If you want documentaries that don't just repeat the headlines, that follow the evidence, verify what's new, and stay with a case after everyone else has moved on, that's what this channel does. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. And I'll leave you with this: what unanswered question in the Nolan Wells investigation do you think investigators need to resolve first? Let me know in the comments. This has been Cases Decoded.